Let's go now to our studio commentary. Joining me here is Li Guofu, a senior research fellow at the China Institute of International Studies, and also He Wenping from the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. He Wenping, let's begin with you and very briefly tell me, how do you think the Chinese leadership will be reacting to this news? Because within his own backyard, that is the Middle East, Ariel Sharon was perhaps one of the most controversial figures in living memory. And the question of hero or even criminal has already been asked. Here in Beijing, though, as a third party, what do you think they'll be saying at this time?
Well, even though the Sharon is a very controversial figure in the Middle East, even in the whole of the world, but I don't think for that we will not say anything about him. At least he is a person suffered from a coma for such a long time, and he had been struggling for maintaining the safety and security of Israel, and also trying, especially during the late half of his time being the prime minister, he tried very hard to reach the peace between Israel and the Palestinians. So I think at least we should send our condolence, deep condolence to Sharon's family and also to the people in Israel.
Of course, he had many conflicts within his own country, particularly with the current Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And it'll be interesting to see how he chooses to react to the death as the current head of government. Of course, there were many problems between these two men, two very strong characters. And Sharon has described Netanyahu as a person who is easily pressured, who gets into a panic, he said, a person who loses his senses. To run a country like Israel, a leader needs to have reason and judgment and nerves of steel, two traits that Netanyahu simply doesn't have. Not so much about Netanyahu, but more about the characteristics that Ariel Sharon thought was necessary to lead a country, a young country like Israel, only 65 years old to this day. Do you think that he will be remembered as a person who really did have the nerves of steel, or as someone who simply didn't listen to potential partners in the US and particularly his closest regional neighbors?
I think Sharon, if we compare with the current Israeli prime ministers, these two people have two different characters, and also two different backgrounds. Mr. Sharon was born, and he was joined in the army or the guerrilla war in the early days of Israel, fighting for its independence. And as a soldier or the commander, he fought bravely in the so-called the major wars Israel had engaged with its neighboring countries very bravely. He is remembered as a soldier, brave soldier, as a commander, very brilliant commanders. But for Netanyahu, he is like a civilian, very nice facing, had very good education in the States. Though I think the two characters are very tough, and especially in defending the Israeli national interests. But I think these two guys are very different in its character and the education background.
Though of course, Benjamin Netanyahu also a leading military man in his time, and I believe that his brother was killed in action, is still regarded today as one of the national heroes in contemporary Israeli history. Let's talk more about the region which you cover so extensively in your research, He Wenping. Netanyahu described and handpicked three countries. He said Iran, Libya and Syria are irresponsible states which must be disarmed of weapons of mass destruction. And it goes to show how much has changed even in the short 7+ years since he suffered that stroke and was being held on life support, that these three countries either have changed markedly or have shown a shift in dynamics. Iran, of course, striking a deal that remains to be seen whether that's effective or not with the international community in the last weeks. Libya, really drawn now against tribal lines and continuing to see extensive problems there, and its leader, of course, having fallen as leader there for many decades. And Syria, as we head into the Geneva II Peace Conference at the end of this month, in a way, you could say that the Middle East hasn't changed. In a way, you could also argue that the subtleties of the Middle East has continued to move slightly. What would you say about Israel's engagement with the Middle East? And only days after John Kerry was there as Secretary of State for his 10th visit in office, is the peace process, or should we just say peace for people there, any closer than it was, say, 10, 15 years ago?
Well, I will not say now the peace is even closer than the day when the Sharon suffered the coma. Even though during those long 8 years when the Sharon was in the bed, but I don't think the situation in the Middle East has changed greatly, even backward than the time when Sharon withdrew his troops from Gaza Strip. So nowadays we can see clearly after the Arab Spring took place, and then the Syria crisis now entering into the third year, and also Al-Qaeda forces has been widespreading, not only in the Iraqi, and also now we have seen their footnote in other countries in Yemen and also in Syria. So they've been fighting there. So I think security situation for Israel, rather than becoming good, but becoming worse than before. They have now deal with a very uncertain Egypt, and also a very how to say, I don't think Iran, even though they reached a nuclear deal, and then we can see all the nuclear issue of Iran has been totally dispersed. So a lot of uncertainty is still lying ahead. So that's why the John Kerry, State Secretary of the United States, traveled so extensively in this region. So when he was in the Israel and then talking with Netanyahu and also with his counterpart of Palestinian, so that's why when Sharon's health situation wasn't so good, and then there are lots of talking, debating, commenting about Sharon's legacy.
One more question to our studio guest here, Li Guofu. You aptly described Ariel Sharon as the military hero that perhaps he'll be remembered equally as he was a statesman in the later part of his life. Very much seen as the action man, the images of him in military fatigues, and yet when it came time for him to wear a civilian suit, he very much did look like the dignified head of government that many people perceive him as. In fact, he went on to say that I've seen everything. I've met the kings, the queens, the presidents, the prime ministers. I've been around the world. He says, I have one thing that I want to do, and that's to try and reach out. Yet when we speak to our correspondents fan out across the Middle East at this hour, many of them say that there are plenty of voices in those countries that would counter that would say Sharon did anything but reach out. In fact, that he closed in.
It is very, very hard to say. And by himself and joining the soldiers, he fought very bravely, very hard for his country. Later on, especially during his very short period of time, and only 5 years, as a prime minister, as a statesman, he changed a little bit about his character, and he definitely working very hard, to try to make a peace with the Palestinians, and also as a statesman, and as a country. So I think he would think again what would be the best for the Israeli peoples. And if he found out that as a soldier he should fight very hard, but as a statesman, and for the long-lasting peace for the people, he need to make a kind of the peace with the Palestinians. So I think he changed a little bit, especially his attitudes towards the peace process. Though he's still very, very hard, fighting for defend Israeli national interests. Even he's very adopt very defined approaches when he talked with the American presidents in defining how is the best for the Israeli peoples. So I think there is a little bit changed according to his position. As I said, as a soldier, and he fought very bravely. But as a statesman, he working very hard, trying. I think at least he made a try to reach out with the Palestinians, with the Arab country, with its neighbors.
Okay, let's just leave it there for now. Ho Ping and Li Guofu joining me here in the studio as we continue our special live coverage on the death of former Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon.